I came across this study one day saying that people at the age of 24 or something who have never been in a relationship before are 80% likely to just remain single for the rest of their lives.
Everyone says like be yourself, right? But sometimes the you being yourself is like a really weird person, right? You're like a really quirky character. Like, yeah, schedule sex.
And that works?
It works. It does work, yeah, you know, because it's about putting aside intentional time. They're like, this is a red flag, this is a beige flag, this is an orange flag, this is too many flags, and you know, and they just get so caught up in it all.
Wait, there's beige and orange flags as well.
Well, orange flag is like, it's not red, but it's sort of could be, and then a beige flag is a boring flag.
Oh god. I didn't even know about these flags.
It's like, ooh, he reads sci-fi novels, gross, beige flag. You know, it's like...
Hi everyone, welcome back to the show. Today, I had my very lovely co-host Thong with me, as well as a very special guest, Susie Kim. Susie is a relationship coach based in Sydney. And yeah, Susie, do you want to quickly introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a relationship and intimacy coach. I'm based in Sydney, as you said. I'm also a qualified therapist. My background's Korean, but I moved to Australia with my family when I was 3. And I also used to be a criminal prosecutor, but now I just work with people in dating, relating, and intimacy.
That's so amazing. How did you go from being a criminal lawyer to a relationship coach? I feel like those are two very separate job profiles.
Yeah, it's so funny, you know, because I feel like from when I was so young, I was really interested in relationships and the inner world and families and all of that. And, you know, when I was 10 years old, I still remember like showing my parents this Reader's Digest article on parenting and being like, hey, you're not doing these 10 points in the article or however many points. You know, I was like, you're not parenting me properly, you know? And so like really from a young age, I was always just so interested in this world. And, you know, I think like, so my dad was a lawyer, right? And my mum was a doctor. And so like, really like, you know, there's that thing in Asian families, you have to be a doctor or a lawyer, maybe an engineer, right? Maybe you could be an engineer. But in my family, it was like, no, you could be a doctor or a lawyer like us, right?
You had two options to choose from.
Yeah. And so from, again, a young age, I just always was like, oh, I want to be a lawyer. I want to be a lawyer because I didn't want to be a doctor. And so I kind of like fell into that, you know, just by reason of my parents. And I really enjoyed the job, but I kind of got to this stage in my career where there was two things. One thing was I went through a breakup with my partner at the time, and I just reevaluated everything in my life. You know, I think around 29 to 31, a lot of people go through this time of like, just what am I doing? So I just reevaluated everything. And the other thing as part of that was like, I would be looking at people more senior than me, and I didn't want to be a judge. I didn't want to be a criminal prosecutor leading criminal trials. Like I didn't want to be a manager at the prosecution. So I just was like, where do I want? I don't want any of these jobs. Like, where am I going? So, you know, it just kind of made sense for me to go, all right, like let's jump ship and let's actually do the thing that I'm really, really interested in and have always been interested in.
Wow. What a crazy jump that is. So just to get that right, so this breakup that you went through that just completely changed your trajectory in life, and then you decided, okay, I want to do this relationship coach thing. And how do you even get started? How does one get started to do what you do?
Yeah, well, you know, all through uni, like I'd always been doing trainings anyway, and I'd just been paying for it for fun. And I'd always just been like doing my own, like I think when I was like 23, I did like an inner child 1 week retreat, you know, like it's like, and I've always been reading like books on relationships, again, like for fun and also to apply in my own life, you know. So in terms of the training, it was a decision, and then I enrolled in a degree. I did a bunch of different types of trainings, I guess. I did a coaching training. I did a kind of more like an emotional energetics kind of training. I did a bunch of like, I've always been into Neo Tantra, again, from about 21. So I
Sorry, what is that?
So
Neo Tantra?
Neo Tantra is like the, I guess for want of a better word, it's like the Western kind of bastardized version of traditional Tantra teachings, right? So it's like, you know, there's like...
What's Tantra teachings?
Tantra teaching. So it's like, there's like lineages from India and from Tibetan Buddhism even around Tantra. So it's like, okay, we'll go into it. So like, when there were different religions, right? There's different religions, and most of the religions, they didn't include sexuality as part of their religion, and it's really because it's too difficult, right? It's easier to stay on path and be in integrity when you're not including sexuality, right? So like at some point, I feel like decisions were made. It's just easier, trust me, to not include sexuality. Tantra is like a set of different lineages, so there's not like one specific teaching of Tantra, but there's a bunch of different like texts called the Vedas and a bunch of different lineages. But the difference with Tantra was that it did also include like the body and sexuality within its teachings. It was maybe like 10 to 15% of Tantra teachings. So then the West, you know, in the sort of the hippie revolution of like the 60s and things like that, they kind of took some of these teachings and they've now really hooked on to the sexuality part of it and the intimacy part of it and the relationship part of it, and that is kind of called Neo Tantra, so just to distinguish it from the proper lineage. Sorry, I just did a little dive on that, but yeah.
No, that's really cool that like you're kind of using those ancient, you know, Tantra techniques to help people in the modern day. And yeah, I didn't know about that, even though I'm Indian. Like, and I've heard like Tantra, like that's a word in Hindi, and I feel like that refers to more magic and that kind of stuff. But I didn't know that had like that kind of meanings as well. That's super interesting.
A lot of it's like in Neo Tantra anyway, right? It's like working with energy, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's okay. That makes sense.
Energy, deep, like the soul, divinity, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Divinity within another human being. Yeah. Anyway, so I've got that. I've got the counseling kind of degree, the master's, and then coaching, and then just a bunch of other stuff. You just kind of do one after the other. You know, that's how I did it anyway.
Yeah. And then, do you think like your background as a criminal prosecutor, does that help you give you any insights into the behaviors of people at all? Like, does that help you in this relationship coaching thing at all, or no?
Yeah, I think it helps in like two ways. So I think like firstly, because like so much of being in court, especially in a criminal trial, it's very like cops and robbers, right? Like I'm on this side and you're on that side, and the prosecution and defense are really making arguments. And I think for me, like it was so obvious to me that like sometimes I was making arguments and I agreed with them. Sometimes I was making arguments and I didn't really believe them. I was just playing a role. Right. So I sort of became quite good at like, you're just playing a role, you're just making a side. And, you know, when couples come to me and they have their each side and they're both so believing of their side, I think it's like, it's kind of easy for me to hold this middle point, you know, like, all right, you're just in this role, you've made the other person the bad person, that, you know, they've made you the bad person and you're clashing, you know?
Okay, wow, that's super interesting.
Yeah, so there's that. The one other way, this is actually more significant, but it's a bit deeper, I guess, is like, I think the biggest impact that being in criminal law had on me was realizing like how many people like commit horrible offenses, but they're not actually monsters, right? You'd think like, oh, they're committing the worst crimes, so they must be really like psychopaths, or they must just be terrible. But you know, most crimes, like most of the worst crimes, it's committed by your family, it's committed by your friends, it's committed by people close to you. And so it's like that idea of like the banality of evil, you know, which is like this phrase from the Holocaust, Hannah Arendt, you know. Anyway, like it's like this idea, right, of like it's not, evil is not something far out there. It can be just within a normal seeming human, you know, and I know that's a bit heavy to think about, but like I think it's really informed the way that I view people and the lengths that people go to and what can happen. And it also means like I'm not very judgmental. You know, when people come, they're all ashamed about having thoughts, or they're all ashamed that they've thought about cheating or they've cheated. You know, it's just like, yeah, you're human. You know, there's like a wide range of human emotions and behaviors that that can happen.
Yeah.
You know?
No, that's very interesting because, yeah, I also don't think people are generally bad. It's just they choose to do bad things or take bad actions. And for them, like, they believe that they're doing the right thing, like most of them, right? They don't really think that they're doing something wrong. But it's just the way they've trained their brain, or like through the circumstances they have experienced, it doesn't really feel wrong to them. So yeah, I guess like if you are a relationship coach, it is important to have that open mindset. Like, don't really judge the person.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. You know, and sometimes people think they are doing the wrong thing, but they can't help it. You know, even within a relationship, you know you're being mean, but you can't help it. It's like, yeah, that's just a part of like the complexity of being human, you know?
Yeah.
I think not enough people educate themselves in terms of love and relationships. You said that you got started by educating self, reading all these books and stuff. Could you please share with us something that stood out to you in all of these years?
Yeah. So people have ideas of what love is, and don't really and often have really disappointing experiences when they've fallen in love, right? They get really hurt. But like my view is like, I think when you've grown up and you don't have a perfect experience of love, right, which most of us do not, right? But when you have parents and you didn't get the kind of love that you wanted, or the what you received and thought was love was actually just a really fallible human being, right, with a lot of trauma and a lot of wounds. Like, your conception of love and your capacity for love is also not actually what love is, right? It's just what you know to be, right? You're just doing what you know to be, how you've been conditioned. And so, like, I think when I'm working with people and they're really struggling and they're really hurt and they really don't know why things are happening in their relationship and why it's also hard, it's like, I guess, like, on a deep level, I'm kind of trying to point them towards, like, hey, you've got all these blocks to love and you've got all these ideas of what love is and isn't. And actually, if you work through all the difficult emotions, like, you will get to a place where you go, oh my God, I feel actually quite free. And actually, there's a lot of love around. There's a lot of love available, you know. So anyway, that's a bit of a long, rambly answer.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. And have you seen this shift in those, I guess you could say, quote unquote, toxic people who are deemed as red flags to be really actually loving people and that can maintain proper relationships?
Yeah,
and
I wouldn't necessarily call them toxic, but like, I can think of like several clients who, when they came to work with me, they had been in like a series of pretty like not great relationships, right? And they didn't really believe in love, but they really wanted something healthy. So they'd never had what you'd consider a healthy relationship. And over time, like, really from learning to like meet some of the different patterns within themselves, some of the different, you know, what was happening inside them, why they were choosing these kinds of relationships, what they were contributing to these kinds of relationships, all that kind of stuff, they were able to really get a lot more secure in themselves. And for sure, like, I've got multiple clients who are now in like the healthiest relationships of their lives, you know, like, and that's very, you can do it, you know, it takes time. It's hard, but you can do it.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about your like journey, because I think you mentioned that you had a bad breakup, and I'm sure like that caused a lot of anxiety and insecurity. Like, how did you overcome those in yourself?
So, yeah, I mean, my first breakup was when I think I was like 16, and it was my first boyfriend. It was my first love, and we'd been dating for 2 years, and he cheated on me with a girlfriend of mine. So at that time, with like all these hormones running, like, I was devastated. I was like absolutely devastated. And, you know, over the years, I think I was cheated on one more time after that. And every time I went through some sort of a breakup, like, I just really devoted myself to going through it. You know, I think some people, after a really terrible breakup, they get so scared that they close and they never want to open up ever again. They were like, that was too hard, right? But I think for me, like, I don't know, I just knew that I wanted to keep going. Like, I wanted to know, I was like, I want to know what love is. I really want to know what love is. So I need to keep going, you know? So I think, like, I've pretty much forgotten what the question is now. I'm like, was it like, how did I get through the heartbreaks?
Yeah,
it's all good.
You know, because I think a big part of heartbreak is like, yeah, can you, like, if you need to work with someone, but can you keep kind of opening and learning about yourself? And, you know, for me, after every heartbreak, I came out knowing so much more about myself, you know, so much more about what I'd been doing in relationship, why I'd made these choices, why I'd acted in the ways that I did, why I stayed when it was clearly a terrible relationship. All those things, it's like I just needed to reflect, you know, and I grew. And
so you're saying, like, even if you go through a bad breakup or go through a bad time, like, don't close yourself off, or like, don't stop trusting people. And I feel like that's harder to do in practice than in theory.
Yeah.
But since you kept doing that, going through it, you were able to come out on the other end, like, much stronger.
Yeah, you come out, like, even more whole, you know, so because you've sort of broken and you feel so broken, but then you come out and you feel even more yourself, you know, if you can keep going, you just don't stop. You know?
That's great. And yeah, like, you mentioned that you're Korean by ethnicity and you came to Australia at a very young age. How did you find, like, you know, dealing with strict parents and, like, you know, managing all your relationships and things like that?
Yeah, it was like, when I think back to my childhood, it was wild for me because my parents were, you know, super hardworking. They'd grown up in that post-war Korea where it was really, everyone was like fighting to survive out of poverty, you know. Like, Korea became a developing country, like, in their lifetime, right? Like, it was a super poor country when they were young. And so on top of that, my parents, you know, they were quite religious. They were very Christian, which a lot of Koreans who, you know, immigrate are. And then they're also quite introverted. And, like, I'm really extroverted. I'm emotional. And I just grew up feeling like I was an alien, you know, and it was openly acknowledged in my family. They were like, we don't really know where you came from. You know, my brother is introverted.
That's funny.
And so it was really hard. Like, I feel like I spent, like, my whole childhood trying to figure out, like, how does this work? Like, this is not right.
Yeah.
You know, this is not okay. And so I really, like, spent a lot of time investing in friendships, even as a child, because I was just like, I was so acutely aware that it didn't feel good for me. And I love my parents, but, like, it just didn't feel good for me. You know?
Yeah. I guess if they're both introverted and you were the only extroverted in the house, like, I'm sure that would cause, like, many differing opinions of how you should approach things and things along those lines. So, yeah, that's crazy.
It's like they just wanted me to study. You know, it's like, that's literally all they wanted me to do.
I think you get that a lot with Asian parents as well as East Asian parents. I would suppose, and I think it's quite the norm, I guess.
Totally.
I think I was pretty much the same. A little bit more on the rebellious side for sure. Yeah. Were there any specific challenges that you had to navigate through living in a more conservative household?
A lot of them socially. So I had a boyfriend in high school, and that's that same boyfriend, and they hated it. You know, they hated it, and so they actually arranged for me to go to his formal. They arranged for one of their family friends to meet him. Like, they didn't even want to meet him. They got a family friend to meet him.
Wow. Just to indirectly see this guy. That's so
crazy.
To okay him. And then they allowed me to go to his formal. No?
That's so funny. Wow.
Yeah.
Wait, I'm just curious now. How does, like, dating and relationships work in the traditional Korean culture? Like, is it arranged marriage type of thing? Because that's what happened in India. I'm not sure if that's the same in Korea.
I think, like, in my parents' generation, there was a lot more of that, or maybe even, you know, like, even before that. Like, my grandma, for sure, was a arranged
Yeah.
marriage. My parents
Yeah.
were set up by their dry cleaner. So it wasn't an arranged marriage, but it was like you meet someone, you get set up by all these people, and then if you like it, you go ahead. But it was not a long courting period. I think my parents dated for like 6 weeks. They just decided to get married.
Yeah.
Right.
You don't see that nowadays.
Yeah.
Whereas like nowadays it's quite different, I think. In Korea it's a lot more modern. But yeah, when I was growing up, the expectation was that I would date and marry a Korean. And my high school boyfriend was like of Hong Kong like descent, but Cantonese descent. But yeah, it was still a bit of an issue that he wasn't Korean, he wasn't Christian.
Okay.
Yeah, I've never dated a Korean though. So
yeah, fair enough.
yeah, it's a bit disappointing for my parents.
Honestly,
but
it's the same for me.
Yeah.
My parents too. They prefer Vietnamese, for me to have a Vietnamese girlfriend, but yeah, that never happened. They're kind of bummed out because of that, but it is what it is, I guess.
Yeah. Well, you can't expect your kids to only date Koreans when you don't even live in Korea, right? Like, if you live in a multicultural environment, and how can you just expect them to like the same things as, I mean, if the surroundings were the same, then I guess it would be much easier. But it's much harder to do it overseas when there's like a blend of cultures.
Yeah, totally. You've got less control, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I want to move a bit into your coaching style. So what would you say is your coaching style like?
Yeah, so I think that my coaching style, like, I try to kind of hit different levels. So, like, I can do pure, like, mental mindset, like getting people to understand what's happening and see it, like, really clearly in their mind's eye. But I also really love going into the emotional layers, right? And a lot of people don't like to access their emotions, but that's where a lot of the work is done. And so I do mental, emotional, also, like, somatic, which is, like, body-based. Like, I think it's so helpful when you're dealing with things like emotions and the subconscious and things that you can't really see or explain, to really go into the body to sort of explore like what's actually happening, right? If there's been a relationship conflict, like what's actually happening in your body that you are freezing and screaming at your partner, like what's happening, right? So I work with the mind, emotions, body, and then there's like the tantric element is really like I work with energy, I work with a spirit if people are open to that. So I'd say like I like to be really practical about it, and I could bring in lots of different layers, but at the end of the day, like I try to be accessible to the person I'm working with.
Okay.
By that, do you also bring up, like case studies or something like that? How do you go about
like,
this?
How do I help people?
Do you give them
like,
examples? Yeah.
It always starts with like, so I would say like some of the most common kind of clients that I work with are like single people who want relationships and they're wondering what's happening in their dating life.
Right.
Or it's people who are in relationship and like struggling and wondering like, what is happening? Why do I want to leave my husband or my wife? Or, like we're just fighting a lot and we're unhappy. Or maybe they've like lost intimacy, right? So it's like, it's very much dependent on what the result is. But say like someone's single and they want a relationship, I usually would like take a bit of a history, like with a questionnaire or something, and get a bit of like an understanding of what's actually happening. And so in my head, I'm sort of like, I'm basically like trying to identify like what are the patterns, what are the blocks, what are the kind of wounds, which then determine like which way do we go, like what do we address, because usually you've got to address like a little bit of mindset, like belief work, but then there's also the deeper emotional blocks, right? Like fear of intimacy or fear of like whatever, like fear of being rejected, right? There's different wounds that show up, and then that will kind of determine how we work with it.
Cool. And what would you say are like the most common wounds that people usually have, or like blocks that stops them from being like, finding the right person?
Yeah, so I think like there's like blocks that are on like the belief levels. I'd say one of the biggest beliefs is like there's no one out there for me, right? Or like they're out there but I'm not going to find them, right? So there's like things like that, or like even a belief of like I'm not good enough. Sometimes that's a bit more hidden underneath. So I'd say there's like belief level blocks, and then there's like deeper blocks which are harder to acknowledge sometimes, which is like that fear of rejection, that fear of like vulnerability, sometimes it's like a fear of risking and opening, you know, it's like, which is similar to that vulnerability, because ultimately there's a fear of abandonment. You know, there's a fear that like, if I open to this person and we go through this really deep journey, like, are they just going to leave me, right? Or are they going to see something they don't like? And is this all going to come crashing down? You know, so I would say that's one of the deepest blocks for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And going back to the first point you've raised, you said that, you know, is there anyone out there for me? That's quite bizarre to me, since we're so connected, more connected than ever before. But people are so lonely these days that's pretty crazy. I have a friend of mine, and in the friendship group, we tend to push him towards, you know, trying out dating, because he himself, I think, wants to be in a relationship, but then he's constantly scared of getting rejected, as well as, you know, just things here and there. He has a lot of barriers, I would say. And I came across this study one day saying that people at the age of 24 or something who have never been in a relationship before are 80% likely to just remain single for the rest of their lives, or something like that.
That's insane.
But for someone that wants to be in a relationship, what do you think? Like, what are the first steps that he should take?
Yeah, so I think like if he knows that he's really afraid of rejection, I think like it would be worth it for him to work on that with someone, you know. And I think like there's, again, people work with these things in such different ways. There's obviously sort of more the cognitive way of like coming up with all the reasons why it's okay to be rejected, and coming up with all the reasons why actually it is worth it to get rejected even if you're in a relationship. I think that like that's important as a first layer. He could just do that probably based on ChatGPT or something, you know. But I think the more important part is like being able to kind of come into contact with that fear yourself, like directly access it and be able to kind of go closer to it. And that's why I said like it's important to work sort of with the body as well, because when you get closer to this feeling, most of the time we're just trying to like, I don't want to feel that, so I'm going to avoid everything that makes me feel that. But when you can kind of be held in it in a session and go closer to it and go, oh, actually, now that I'm going closer to it, you know, you get other information. You suddenly realize, you know, oh my God, this reminds me of this other memory that I had, you know, or this reminds me of when I was bullied and how afraid I was as a 10-year-old or an 11-year-old getting bullied, and when I was rejected then. Like, you get a lot of other pieces, and that, like, by really loosening that up and being more okay with that, it just makes it easier to go, all right, that's kind of healing, right? It's healing. It's like healing and integrating a wound so that you can move forward and not kind of be, you know, beholden to it.
Yeah. So you're suggesting that, like, you basically need to face your fears and, like, work on them, like, slowly.
Yeah.
And figure
like,
that out.
slowly, gently, and in a way where, like, you know, because I think sometimes people say face your fears, but it's very mental. It's very just mindset oriented. But it's like when you're dealing with matters of the heart and relationship, you kind of need to feel it a little bit, you know? You kind of need to be able to handle that, because when you're in a live situation, those feelings are going to come up, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm like struggling to kind of wrap my head around this a bit, but can you give us like some examples or like some techniques that you generally use with your clients to help them overcome some of the barriers that they face?
Yeah. So like it's always a process, right? But let's take fear of rejection as one.
Yeah.
Right. So generally when someone comes and starts to work with me and they've got this fear of rejection, they've got all these like stories around being rejected and how terrible it is. So we might spend a bit of time just to help them settle. We might spend a bit of time like really just diving a little bit into the reasons around being rejected and maybe why it's not so bad, and actually maybe there's a part of them that really thinks it's worth it if they can find the relationship that they want, right? So this is just like mindset coaching, right? So I'd maybe do a bit of mindset coaching. And then when there's a bit more trust, you know, then they might be ready to actually go in and just like start to explore what this feeling really is in themselves, right? So I'd normally guide that process. So I'd get them to just like feel it. There's lots of different techniques. Like you could feel where it is in your body, feel like how big the feeling is. There's like ways to like visualize and conceptualize feeling. So it's not just like this random thing. You're like, where is it in your body? How big is it? You know, what texture is it? What shape is it? What color is it? And like generally it gives you more access to like actual feelings in your body, right? And then as you go through that, then you realize, oh, there's actually different feelings. Oh my God, now it's changing into this other feeling of powerlessness. Now it's feeling into this other feeling of hopelessness. Now I feel like I'm 2 years old, you know? So it's like, it kind of shows you what's happening when that fear of rejection comes up. What's happening when you're like, I don't think I can go on this date. It's almost like you regress in that moment to like an earlier memory that's like stored in your body, right? Or a series of memories. And you don't really get that information until you sort of start to journey a bit and loosen it up and get a bit more okay with it. Yeah, does that help?
Yeah, I think that gives us, like, obviously we would have to do the entire therapy session to actually get through it. But yeah, I think that gives us a good overview of like what you're referring to and some concrete examples.
Yeah.
And lastly on this section, do you have any like success stories that, you know, a client has come in where they were super like insecure or something, and then, you know, by working with you, they were able to overcome their challenges?
Yeah, so I could think of like one client like pops up immediately. Like she had not been in a relationship for like 3 or 4 years, but she'd had all of these kinds of like little entanglements and crushes on people that weren't reciprocated, and so she kept like choosing unavailable men. Right? She was like would develop a crush on someone who was already in a relationship, or she'd develop a crush on someone who she really wanted to date, but he wouldn't quite date her, you know, like it was, right? So that had happened for years. And we worked on a bunch of stuff, right? Why are you choosing unavailable people, and where does that really come from? You know, it turns out it really comes from probably her family, you know, like her dad wasn't around, her parents went together, you know, like there's so many reasons why you could choose, but for her, that was the reason. And it's not just understanding that reason. She'd had therapy before. It's really like going in and like doing some major healing work, you know, and then also making dating like quite fun for her, because I think dating felt so heavy for her and like such an effort. And we just sort of like,
May I ask, heavy in what way?
I think like for a lot of people, dating feels like such a drain of time and energy for little reward.
Right. Okay.
You know?
Okay.
So like heavy in that way, you know, just like, why am I doing this? I have to get ready, I have to talk to all these people, I have to trawl through all these messages, and for nothing,
right?
And for no, you know, no good result in years, you know. And and basically like through working together, she started to make better and better choices. Right, she was doing some serious heart healing, and so she naturally gravitated also towards better matches, you know. And she, I worked with her a few years ago. She got married this year, you know. She started dating someone when we were working together, and then she, you know, that relationship continued, and you know, they're married. It's so sweet. Yeah.
I guess that's a great success story then.
Yeah, you know.
Yeah, for sure. I would also like to talk a little bit about today's online dating platforms. Massive, right? So we recently talked to someone as well, like a co-founder of a dating app. I just wanted to ask your input on online dating and what you think of it. Is it like an honest way of meeting someone nowadays?
Look, I think that there are still really, really good people who are on the dating apps, but I think that the culture on most of the major dating platforms has really gotten really bad. Like, it's not what it was 10 years ago. You know, there's like a lot of people are a bit sick of dating apps, so they don't put in as much effort. And I think things like ghosting or just not replying for ages, things like that have become so normal, because I think it's sort of become this thing where, oh, you're not a real person, you're just this person on my screen, right? So I think it has become a more difficult experience in general. But having said that, like, trust me, everyone is still on the dating apps at least some of the time. except for the few people who, you know, might swear off it for some amount of time. But like most people I know, they will go on and off the apps, you know, and they're all looking for love. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Yeah, and like, why do you think that is? Like, they keep going on and off. What's the main reason for that?
Yeah, because, you know, it's still the place where there are the most people who are single, right? Who are obviously single. So the reality is, like, everyone still has a dating profile, which they activate and deactivate. You know, it's still the easiest way for most people to meet people. I think that a lot of people are sometimes going to singles events more. I think that more people should be picking up people in real life, but people are also quite shy to do that, you know, so it really is one of the easiest ways for most people to meet people.
Yeah.
I mean, I've used it in the past. I think we didn't we all? And I mean, there were a lot of great people I otherwise wouldn't have met, but you said that you prefer real life sort of events, like you've mentioned just now. What sort of events are you referring to?
Well, I was actually saying I think people should just pick up more in real life, right? Like, not because just like talking to one another in real life, just approaching people. Approaching
in real
people
life.
in real life.
But then I was just about to say that some people are also quite creeped out, if I could say so, of being approached just out of nowhere, because everyone seems to be busier than ever, right? Everyone's just heading to work or going out to see friends. No one's just outside just because they want to go to a bar or something. Like, just a handful of people, of course. There's still people like that. But then in most cases, if you approach people on the streets, they'd probably give you a number or like a fake number or, you know, and I'm not sure about that. What are your thoughts?
So I think that the best way to meet people, like not on the apps, is, okay, firstly, it's through friends or friends of friends. So it's going out to like a group dinner, or going to a friend's birthday party, or going to your friend's birthday party as a +1, right? I think it's really in those situations where you can have a more natural conversation, find out if they're single, see if you guys are flirting, and then you can, you know, pick up, right? The next best way, if it's not through friends, is through activity. So yeah, I agree, like cold approaching on the street is a little bit like, it can feel a bit intrusive, and you don't even know if they're single, right? So I think like it's always best if you're within some kind of a contained setting, right? So maybe like you're both at a specific event together, and then you strike up a conversation, see if there's a bit of flirting. Again, you might find out if they're single. Like, usually if they're in a relationship, they will tell you pretty quickly if you're flirting with them. They'll just drop it in, like, oh yeah, my wife, or like, oh yeah, my boyfriend, you know, like it becomes obvious. So I think like going to more social events and going to your friends, especially your friends' social events, I think it's like, that is so helpful.
Yeah. And then
For sure.
Do you have any advice, you know, for someone who's afraid of doing that? Like, you know, going to social events, or just like talking to people at events. Like, what would you say to them? Like, how can they overcome their block?
Yeah, so if people are really nervous and afraid of, you know, going to meet new people at events, I think like what you need to remember is, everyone says like, be yourself, right? But sometimes the you being yourself is like a really weird person, right? You're like a really quirky character, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And I think like it's true, but like try and like relax first, because I think like who you are when you're relaxed is kind of the best version of you, right?
Yeah.
So whatever you need to do, like speak to a friend on the way out, or do whatever, like some squats, like something to like get you into a more relaxed vibe. Listen to music, you know, do something like that helps you relax, right? And then from that place, when you're already more relaxed, then you have to remember that whoever I am now is fine. You know, so I think most people are like, oh, I don't want to be awkward. I feel so shy. I feel so introverted. I feel so scared to meet people. It's like, yeah, once you're relaxed, it's okay to feel a little bit shy. You know, it's just like tell yourself that. And then from then, you're just kind of looking for people who you might have a little vibe with, right? You're not trying to force conversation if it's like drawing blood from a stone, right? you're just like, you know, you're just finding the other little shy people maybe. You know, like,
right. Yeah, like that, I think that's going to be a great conversation. Two introverts trying to talk to each other.
What do you think of that, actually? Just introverts being with one another? Because in my opinion, I think what works is if an extroverted person is with an introverted person, and or if they're both extroverted, I guess it's fine. But I think two introverts don't really go well with one another. What are your opinions on that?
I think it can work really great. You know, I think that two introverts together, they really respect each other's space. They really get how like being in silence is okay. Like it can be quite peaceful, because I think sometimes when an introvert is with an extrovert, the introvert thinks that the extrovert is too loud and talks too much. You know.
Never thought about it that way.
You know, so I think all combinations can work. You know?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
That's super interesting.
Yeah.
Overall, overall, have you noticed any trends emerging in the dating world within the past few years? Like anything interesting happening?
Yeah, I think there have been a few different trends. I think one of the trends is like going off dating apps and this sort of movement to like not engage in dating apps. I think another trend that's really becoming so popular, especially with Gen Zs, is open relationships or ethical non-monogamy. So it's this idea of like dating or being in relationship with more fluid structures, right? And it's kind of been going on for a long time, but there's a bit more, there's just a bit more languaging around it. You know, I think young people especially are really talking about open relationships a lot more. It's really interesting. Yeah.
What are your opinions on that, actually? Open relationships, situationships, and being exclusive, or, you know, there's so many labels on them.
Yeah,
nowadays.
so I mean, I think that really it's for you to decide. You know, I think it's so okay if you're like, I 100% want to be monogamous only and be in a fully committed relationship, if that's what you want. Great, you know, and if you want children, especially in the beginning, I think it's helpful to have like the security of a fully committed relationship. Not saying that open relationships can't be committed, but, you know, it's a little bit easier to create like a secure relationship within a closed container, I believe, for most people. I think that the rise of open relationships also, I think it's rising in young people, and also I think older people are a little bit more interested in it as well, like people who have been married for some time. And I'm sort of like, yeah, go for it, you know, explore, but explore gently, you know, like read the books, maybe get some sessions with someone and do it gently, because there's so many ways to do it in like a skillful way, you know. Situationships are a bit different for me, you know, because situationships for me are like, it's a bit more undefined. You know, it's a bit more undefined.
I don't even know what it means.
Yeah, so situationship is literally like, we don't know what this is. There's no definition.
Yeah.
I think
it's just like everyone's just vibing together.
Yeah, everyone's just doing their thing.
Random.
Yeah. Whereas like, I think it's actually helpful if you're in a situationship, like it's helpful to define what's going on. Right? Like even if the definition is like, hey, this is a casual relationship. We see each other like at short notice as it suits us. We don't like need to share a lot about what's going on in our lives, or like we don't need to follow up. You know, I think it's like helpful just to like, what are the expectations and the meanings that we're both making? Because I think, great, be in a casual relationship. But the problem with situationships is like when one person expects something and the other person expects something else, and there's this mismatch, and that's very painful. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So just getting that out from the get-go, right?
Yeah. Can I teach you like an acronym that is really helpful in,
sure,
you know, like like early dating, especially if you're being intimate or if you're having sex. Before you do that, it's really helpful. So it's called RBDSMA. And it's from this organization called ISTA. And you would be basically talking about, so R is relationship status. So that's like, are you seeing other people? Are you in a bunch of situationships? Are you in a relationship? Are you, I don't know, solo, polyamorous? You know, there's all these different definitions, right? So like, what is your relationship status right now? Or are you like not actually seeing anyone and we're the only people, right, that you're connecting with? B is boundaries. So it's like, hey, what are your boundaries, right? And boundaries always change, right? But it could be that some people's boundaries are like, hey, I only date people exclusively. I don't like to date multiple people at the same time, and I don't like other people to date multiple people at the same time. It could also be like sexual boundaries. Like, I don't have sex with people until I get to know them well enough. That could be a boundary, right? So what are your boundaries? D is desires. Like, what do you want, right? And that could be relationship wise. Like, oh, I just want a nice connection for a little while. Eventually I want a, you know, beautiful relationship, but right now I'm up for just cuddles and connection, you know, casual. It could also be sexual desires. Like, oh, I'd actually really love to explore like this and this, you know, could be that. RBD. S is sexual health history. Like, do you have any active infections? Have you had any in the past? When was your last test? And then my favorite one is M, which is meaning. It's like, what does it mean to you? Like, if we connected, if we dated, what meaning are you making? Like, what does that mean? And then A is aftercare. So that's just like, if we have a connection, if we have a date, or we have a sexual encounter, what does aftercare look like for you? Is it me messaging you the next day? Is it us being able to talk? Like, what is that? So I think it's just like a really like fun thing to actually do on dates, right?
Yeah.
Wow, that's I've never heard of that, but that's really insightful. Just getting all these points out of the way. Once you get to know somebody, that could really save and make a relationship.
Totally.
For sure.
Yeah, I think those are really good points that I think people should have discussions about. But I think the problem with situationships is that it is undefined. Like, you don't want to put a label on it, and so I don't know if someone's having a situationship, they're necessarily, you know, having those conversations. So and
a lot of the time people, like, exactly, they don't want to put a label on it. They're not willing to put a label on it, you know. And I would encourage my clients to be like, hey, really think about what you want and what's okay for you, and just put it to them directly. Hey, is this casual to you with like zero commitments, and is this just like on the most casual of casual? Like, is that what it is for you? Like, you know, let's just get this out. If that's what it is, that's what it is, you know?
Yeah.
And then you can decide if that's enough for you or not.
Yeah. That's true.
So we talked a lot about just starting to date a lot, but I would like to talk about also rekindling an old fire. I guess you could say that. So what are your tips for couples who, you know, who've been together for so long? I have a few friends as well who've been together for, you know, 4 or 5 years, and then maybe the girl would say, oh, it wasn't like it used to be. There's no romance involved anymore. There's nothing is fun. Nothing excites me anymore, and we barely have sex and all of that sort of thing. So could you also give advice for people who are struggling with that?
Yeah, for sure. You know, I think that so many people assume that once you're in a relationship, like, you kind of don't have to work on it, especially if you're not fighting and you're getting along. Like, oh, we'll just keep going, it's fine, and you kind of just slide into this very comfortable kind of place. And I think that's just such a fallacy. You know, it's like, I really think you need to take the mindset of, this person is always changing, even if it's very slow, and this relationship needs to have a bit of energy going into it if I want it to be a certain way, right? If I don't really care, I'll just let it be whatever it is, right? And I think when you slide so much towards comfort, then you lose the novelty, right? And the effort. And if you think about it, in the beginning, it's like you're fueled, you've got so much curiosity, and you've got so much sort of drive to basically create really beautiful, fun experiences for each other, right? And impress each other and see the best in each other. And it's like, you actually need to put in a bit of effort for that all to come back. right? And so I would recommend, really depends who I'm talking to, because I think like some like men more than women, but I've also recommended it to a woman yesterday, you know. It's like you can systematize ways to bring back some of that novelty and some of that excitement. And a lot of the time it's things like, are you still expressing like what you really find adorable about each other? You know, if not, like put a reminder on your phone that every day you express something, just something simple, genuine, right? Because you just want those little moments of like, really? Right? That already adds a little bit of life, right? Are you asking deeper questions? Are you really curious about what's going on in your partner's world, or like just what they think about stuff, how they feel about stuff, right? Is that going on? Okay, put a reminder on your phone, right? Ask ChatGPT for like 50 ways to get to know your partner better. And ask, like, take some risks, like go somewhere different, right?
Yeah.
And then I think in terms of intimacy, again, like people really just do the same old, and then suddenly, like with desire as well, in the beginning, it's all spontaneous desire. You don't have to put any effort in, and you just have so much desire. But eventually that changes gear into responsive desire. You know, you actually have to start like foreplay in order to feel desire, right? It doesn't just happen organically because there isn't that same amount of chemicals, right? So it's like you actually have to get started in order to want to get started, right? So I think like that's why people are always like, yeah, schedule sex, you know? Because
and that works.
It
Scheduling?
works. It does work, yeah, you know, because it's about putting aside intentional time, right, to have sex. The one other thing I'd say really about intimacy in long-term relationships is, in the beginning there's a lot of like hard, fast, exciting sex, and after a while, I find this with women especially, but it can also happen with men, it can happen with all genders, but women more often are expressing this to me, where they want things to be slower, they want things to be more relaxed, like in bed, right? They want more time spent on just pleasure without going straight to having sex, right? And then it being over. And I think that it's like that starts with like the kind of touch that I think a lot of men are maybe not trained in. This is actually like Neo Tantra, right? It's like, how can you touch your partner in a way where like your love is in your fingers, you know, where she can feel like your care and your presence is in your fingers. So you're not just like grabbing at her like, yeah, let's go to bed. It's like, no, there's like this presence and this love, and you know, it's this sort of devotion. And I think that kind of care is often missing. It's a lack of education, you know, and a lot of women crave that, you know, after a certain amount of time from their partners. So yeah, learning things like that.
And I think a lot of women as well, they're quite shy when it comes to bringing this up in the first place as well, right?
It can be so awkward, yeah.
Right? But then I guess you need to have these conversations to get that going, and to actually listen to the other person, what they want as well.
Yeah, I think like talking about sex can be so hard that the couples sometimes just ignore it, you know?
Yeah, just let it be, right?
It's
and
like,
then it just kind of dies
it's
down.
just too awkward. But I would say like even like leaning into that awkwardness is already going to help you, you know, like leaning into that awkwardness already, it brings a bit of life and something new to the relationship, you know. So if you're bringing up something about sex, my biggest tip is like, don't bring it up in a way where you're shaming the other person, or it sounds like you're shaming, or it sounds like you're criticizing. You could almost lean into it like saying what you actually love, right? Like, oh, I really love it when you like just touch me really slowly. Oh my God, I love that so much, right? Or like, oh, I really love it when I feel so connected to you, you know, during sex. It's, you know, it's been a while, but that's like one of my favorite memories. You know, it's like you're like starting with something positive, you know, appreciative.
Yeah. I think next, I think we should slowly wrap up, but I think there's like a couple other questions I want to ask you. Yeah, like in terms of dating or like finding the right person, what would you say are the biggest challenges that first men face and then women face? Like, what are the different challenges that each of them face?
Yeah, I think that men face like one of the ones that you mentioned earlier, Tong, which is like approaching women and not wanting to be seen as a creep. I think a lot of men, like, because there's been such a narrative around the Me Too of like being a predator and things like that, I think men are really like, there's a bit of a crisis around how do I be a strong, masculine, attractive man, but also not too strong because then I'll be a creep. You know, so it's like, how do I approach, or how do I like initiate, or how do I like hit on someone, or how do I express interest, or you know, even within a dating context, like how do I kind of like be this sort of provider character without, you know, triggering her feminist wounds, you know, it's like without her thinking I'm trying to control her, you know. It's like it's such,
not
I think it's
toxic masculinity.
Exactly. How do I be masculine but not toxic? I think that men really struggle with that, and a lot of the time what I see is men, like especially if they're like a little bit sensitive to that, they sort of go too into themselves, you know, like they don't initiate, and they kind of end up being like a bit too mellow, you know, they don't want to offend, whereas actually like most of the guys doing that, it's like you don't really have any creep in you. You know, like most of the guys thinking that way are so not creepy that what you need to do is really lean into that confidence and sort of that more like leader energy where you're like making jokes and you're like being a bit cheeky and you're like, you know, like proposing to do things and initiating things, like you know, I really think like that's one of the biggest challenges for guys. And then what do you think about that? Is that like,
I think that's
check out?
Certainly true. Like especially like talking to people, you don't want to come across as too strong, right? And it's just hard to find that balance. But I think it's also like with personal insecurity that, you know, you don't feel like people like you, or like if you, because I feel like guys face a lot more rejection generally. So they're like, since they've faced that rejection, they're like, oh, I'm not good enough. I need to work on myself. I need to go to the gym, do all these things. And that kind of just goes into their own head, and they're just repeating that over and over again, which
so
may be true, maybe not true. And that I don't think is healthy. So just breaking out of that and actually, you know, trying to talk to people and being open to flirting and being rejected, I think that's the hardest thing.
Yeah, I love that, actually. I love that. I think it's part of a man's like journey in dating is really how to grapple with rejection and being okay with it, not taking it personally. You know?
A bit of the women's challenges as well, like the challenges that women face in terms of dating.
Yeah, like I think there's a couple of things that maybe they're related. Like I think one problem that women face is there is a lot of dating information out there, especially for women. It's for men as well, but especially for women on TikTok and Reels and things like that. And some of it is great. It's like, have higher standards. But like some of it is really confusing, right? It's like all of these icks, like, ew, I hate it when he wears a backpack. And like, there's just so much out there that where I see sometimes women have like get it all confused, and they sort of like prioritize things that are not important, and then they get turned off by things that are not important. And you know, they're like, this is a red flag, this is a beige flag, this is a orange flag, this is too many flags, and you know, and they just get so caught up in it all.
Wait, there's beige and orange flags as well.
Like, well, orange flag is like, it's not red, but it's sort of could be, and then a beige flag is a boring flag.
Oh God. I didn't even know about these flags.
It's like, ew, he reads sci-fi novels, gross, beige flag. You know, it's like so yeah, I just think that sometimes like women get a bit in their heads about it all, and they're trying to follow all these formulas and like follow all these rules, and it's like, oh, like, you know, just go out there and have a good time, you know, you don't have to be, but the other side to that is I think women are also very more and more they feel like there's less emotional safety you know, and I think that is also an issue that women and men face, but men don't express it as much. And I think women a lot of the time.
What do you mean by emotional safety?
Like, I think like there's like physical violence, right? They're scared of like physical safety, but there's also like emotional safety within relationships. It's like, okay, so I think what it actually is a lot of women feel quite insecure, right? A lot of men also, but it manifests differently. And when you feel insecure and like not quite safe, you kind of want a man to be really present and really attuned and really like emotionally available, so that you can just be your full self, right? And share who you are and be vulnerable and all that kind of stuff. And I think like there's a bit of a sentiment that a lot of men are not able to do that, you know? And so a lot of women complain about there not being like emotional safety, emotional attunement, you know, emotional capacity, emotional maturity from men to really like provide this level of depth and safety that they're wanting, you know. Anyway, it kind of ties in also to the men's problem, which is, hey, do you want me to be sensitive or do you want me to be, you know, strong? Like, you know,
yeah, pick one or the other. It can't be both.
You know, and like I think women do expect men to be both more and more. You know, and I think that there is space for that. I think there is a maturing going on. But it's also like, as a woman, it's also recognizing that men have been raised in a particular way and they can mature and they can have those capacities, but it's not going to be like, it's not going to be the same as your girlfriend, you know?
Yeah.
Right. I've also heard that people suggest that even though you think you have a happy relationship, you should see a relationships counselor. Do you agree with that statement?
So I'm married and I love therapy. Yeah. Like, I just think it's so useful. Like, I love my sessions with my husband. So yeah, I think it's awesome, right? Because I think
also you actually do it yourself.
Yes.
You see.
Yes, and I hope that I'm doing it.
That's super interesting.
Forever, you know, like I love it. I've got my own personal therapist and I've got a couples therapist, you know, and I also see a bunch of coaches, because, you know, for me, it's like, it's just about, I guess for me, it's a little bit about like optimization, but also when it's just you and another person, no matter how like happy you are, it's a real breath of fresh air knowing that just like one day a month, you're going to see someone and they're going to hold it for you. It's not just you and them. So I think it really creates a lot of space in the relationship to bring up some of those things that just are a little bit difficult to talk about, you know, or even if you're like, I have to say, some of my couples do come because they're pretty happy, but they just want to deepen. They want to know how to connect even more, you know, or they're kind of roommates and they want to know how to connect better. So it's like, if you have someone who's able to just like facilitate that for you, it is so much easier than you being like, hey, let's do this exercise. It's like, nope, someone's just making us do it.
Yeah, that's
like, it's so nice.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. I never thought of it that way. But yeah, like, even if you're in a relationship, you can still go to therapy, because the therapist can talk about things that you don't want to talk about necessarily, which might seem awkward. But in talking to the therapist, it would just come up naturally, and then you can talk about it. You have the safe space to do it. So yeah, that's great.
Yeah, you know, it's only for like very motivated people. You know, most people don't think like that. But I'm like, do it, people. It's so worth it. Why don't you want to have like the happiest, most fulfilling relationship? You know.
Yeah. Yeah. That's super interesting. And yeah, I think we skipped this question a bit, but I also want to go back to it. But who do you think has it harder in terms of like dating and relationships? Like, would you say like men have it worse or women have it worse? And what's your reason for that?
It sounds like a trick question a little bit, right?
You can't just say both. You have to pick one.
I think that I think that the people who have it the hardest is actually women who want to have children and who are in their kind of like mid-30s. Right, who are looking for a partner. And I think that a lot of those women feel this pressure of like, I really want to have a child, but I need to meet someone, and you know, I know that men also go through that. Like I know a lot of men who are like, I want to have a family and I want to meet someone, but they don't have this pressure of like, oh, I'm going to meet someone within 5 years, otherwise I might not be able to have children. You know, I might need to have IVF, like all this kind of stuff. You know, I think like I have a lot of friends personally, and I have a lot of clients who've frozen their eggs in preparation because, you know, they want to be able to have children, you know, but they also want to meet the right person. So I think that's actually, for me, like that's who I think has it the hardest. Yeah.
I think that's a fair.
I heard about freezing eggs. When do women get that done?
I mean,
actually?
I think it's in their 30s a lot of the time. Yeah.
In their 30s.
Yeah,
okay. That's the preferred time.
Well, I think it's the time, from my observation, it's when they can afford it, and it's when they're kind of thinking about it, right? And yeah, and because it's like it's thousands of dollars. You often have to have 2 rounds, and I think when you're in your 20s, you're often not thinking about it. When you're in your 30s and you're single, or you're even in a relationship but you don't want to have a child, you go, oh, better preserve this now. Like, better just, you know, not that it works completely, but, you know, I think people like to have that as a backup.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think we can start closing. So we like to ask this question to all of our guests. Because Aadi and I, we love reading, so we like to ask our guests what is their favorite book. Is there a book that you could recommend to our listeners, or is there a podcast you like to listen to? Just about anything.
Cool. Yeah, so I think one of the books that I recommend quite a lot to my clients who are in relationship is a book by Doctors John and Julie Gottman, and it's called 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work. Right, and it sounds boring, but it's actually just setting out like their relationship theory and all the elements that, based on their research, are the elements necessary for a healthy relationship. Right, so I think that it's just good first principle, very easy to read, very pleasant to read, makes a lot of sense kind of a book that I think anyone in a relationship, or even wanting to be in a relationship, it's just worth having that having that knowledge. You know?
Yeah, I think that's good to have like a base understanding. I'm going to throw a bit of an abstract question at you. Do you believe in true love, and do you believe that everyone can find it?
I do believe in true love. I don't believe everyone will find it. Because I think that...
Wow, that's a bit cynical as a relationship therapist.
Well, I don't think...
I don't
think it's guaranteed, because I think it takes... It can take work, and also I think love is like, it's a practice over time, and it takes effort that not everyone is willing to put in.
So you actually have to put in
that's
effort.
just the reality. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think you have to stay the distance, and you have to work through all of the things that come up in a relationship, right? And come up in yourself. So it's hard work, you know, and I think that not everyone is up for that, and that's okay. You know, it's not for everybody, but I mean, I would recommend it, but the reality is not everyone is up for that, you know?
Yeah. And I think a bit of a follow-up
some
question.
people are.
Sorry,
you know?
a bit of a follow-up question.
No, that's okay, yeah.
I think this might be a bit hard question to answer, but if you could give one advice to, you know, someone searching true love, what would it be? Like, what's your one piece of advice?
I think my one piece of advice is like keep going, you know? Like, it gets easier over time. Even if it takes you 10 years, like, it's still going to be worth it. Even if it takes you 20 years, it's still going to be worth it. You know, like love and experiencing the fullness of love in the way that you imagine it, like, it adds so much to your life. So I think it's worth it to do the healing work, even if it takes you a long time.
Yeah.
You know? So just keep going. Why wouldn't
I think that's a great message. But yeah, last question that we like to ask is, I think you might have shared this already, but do you have any final message you want to leave our audience with? Or, you know, any links to your socials or any plugs that you want to mention?
Yeah, thanks. So people can find me on Instagram. It's Susie Kim Love. SUSIEKIM Love. They can also find me on Facebook if they prefer. I actually use my personal Facebook page more, so I think it's also Susie Kim Love, like facebook.com/Susie Kim Love. And yeah, I think in terms of a plug, like I am actually going to be running an Eastful dating course starting in February. This one is actually just for women.
Yeah.
And it's yeah, if you're interested, just look me up, you know. And I'd love to have you. And, you know, if anyone's listening to this at some point and they just have a question, I'm pretty responsive on socials. So just reach out and I'm pretty happy to, have a chat.
Cool. We thank you for your time, Susie. That was amazing. I personally learned a lot. And yeah, thank you again.
You're welcome. Thank you.